at rest. That is the story your senses are at rest. That is the story your senses are telling you. And it is a story so convincing, so perfectly constructed by millions of years of evolution, that questioning it feels almost unnecessary. But the floor beneath you is not still. The building you are in is not still. The ground beneath that building, the soil, the bedrock, the entire crust of this planet, is hurtling eastward at over 1,600 kilometers per hour. You are spinning. You have been spinning since the moment you were born. And the only reason you cannot feel it is because the laws governing that motion are so precise, so mathematically consistent, that they erase themselves from your perception entirely. Isaac Newton understood something that most people spend their entire lives never confronting. Motion is not the exception in this universe. Rest is. And what we call stability, what we experience as the solid, quiet, trustworthy ground, is not the absence of force. It is forces in perfect, continuous negotiation. So ask yourself this, not as a thought experiment, as a genuine question. What would actually happen if the Earth stopped spinning? Not slowed gradually, not shifted slightly. I stopped, right now, completely. And what would that moment reveal about the invisible architecture holding everything you have ever known in place? Here is where human intuition begins to collapse. When we imagine the Earth stopping, most people picture something like a car braking. A jolt, perhaps. Some turbulence. Then stillness. Because that is what stopping means to us. The comfortable end of motion. But Newton's first law of motion does not care about comfort. It states, and with the cold precision of mathematics, that an object in motion continues in motion unless acted upon by an external force. The Earth might stop, but you would not. At the equator, the surface of the Earth moves at approximately 1,674 kilometers per hour relative to the planet's rotational axis. You, standing on that surface, share that velocity entirely. If the ground beneath you were to instantaneously halt, your body would continue moving eastward at 1,674 kilometers per hour. Not because something pushed you, but because nothing stopped you. This is inertia, the most fundamental property of matter, and it does not negotiate. This is the fracture between how we experience reality and how reality actually functions. We perceive stability because the ground moves with us. We feel safe because the contract between our velocity and the Earth's velocity has never once been broken in our lifetime. We mistake the consistency of a law for the absence of a law. And it is precisely this mistake, this deep, inherited blindness, that Newton spent his life dismantling. The first thing to understand is the atmosphere. The air surrounding this planet does not float passively above the surface. It rotates with it. Billions of tons of gas have been carried along by the Earth's spin for as long as the planet has existed, locked into the same rotational motion by friction and gravity and time. If the Earth stopped spinning instantaneously, the atmosphere would not stop with it. It would continue moving eastward at rotational speed, sweeping across the surface of a suddenly stationary planet. The result would be a global wind event of incomprehensible violence, sustained supersonic flows stripping the surface clean, scouring mountains, accelerating across plains with a force no structure built by human hands could withstand. Cities would not fall. They would be erased. The speed of sound is roughly 1,235 kilometers per hour. The atmosphere, now moving at 1,674 kilometers per hour at the equator, would be traveling faster than the sound of its own destruction. But this is only the first consequence. And consequences, like Newton's laws, do not stop at one. Water obeys the same laws as air, perhaps more visibly. The oceans, which cover more than 70% of this planet's surface, are currently held in their basins partly by the centrifugal effect of the Earth's rotation. That spin creates a subtle but significant equatorial bulge. The Earth itself is not a perfect sphere. It is wider at the equator by approximately 43 kilometers because the rotational force has, over billions of years, pushed mass outward along that belt. The oceans respond to this geometry. Their distribution across the planet is, in part, a consequence of spin. Remove the spin instantly, and the oceans begin to redistribute. The equatorial bulge, no longer maintained by rotation, starts to relax. Water flows toward the poles. Massive continental-scale floods advance across northern and southern land masses, while new land emerges along the equator where ocean floors rise above the receding waterline. A single-world ocean, vast, unbroken, would eventually encircle the polar regions. The familiar map of the world would cease to exist, not in centuries, in days. What this moment reveals is something Newton intuited, but could only partially articulate. The shape of the world itself is not fixed. It is a dynamic equilibrium. The continents do not sit in permanent positions. The oceans do not hold their shape by default. They are the result of forces in ongoing, continuous conversation. And the shape we see is only the shape those forces currently produce. Deeper than the surface, deeper than the oceans, there is a conversation happening in the Earth's core that most people never think about. And it may be the most consequential consequence of all. The Earth's magnetic field, the invisible shield extending tens of thousands of kilometers into space, is generated by the movement of liquid iron in the outer core. This movement is driven, in large part, by the rotation of the planet itself. The geodynamo, as scientists call it, requires spin to sustain itself. It is not a permanent feature. It is a process, and like all processes, it depends on its conditions continuing to exist. If the Earth stopped spinning, the geodynamo would eventually collapse. The magnetic field would weaken and fragment, and without that field, the Earth would be exposed, directly, continuously, to the solar wind. A constant stream of charged particles from the Sun, carrying enough energy to strip away planetary atmospheres over geological time. We know this has happened before. Mars once had a magnetic field. Mars once had liquid water on its surface. Mars rotates more slowly than Earth, and its core cooled and solidified billions of years ago. Its magnetic field died. Its atmosphere was slowly torn away. Today, the atmospheric pressure on Mars is less than 1% of Earth's. Newton gave us the laws of motion and gravitation. But embedded inside those laws is something more unsettling. The recognition that protection itself is a function of movement. Stillness is not safety. Stillness at planetary scale is slow erasure. At this point, some will object. They will say, but the Earth is slowing down. Scientists measure it. The rotation is decelerating due to tidal friction from the Moon. Aren't we inevitably heading toward a stopped planet anyway? Isn't this already written into the physics? The measurement is real. Tidal friction from the moon does transfer angular momentum away from the Earth. The day is getting longer, but the rate is approximately 1.4 milliseconds per century. At that pace, the Earth would need roughly 200 billion years to stop rotating entirely, a timeline more than 14 times the current age of the universe. Long before that, the Sun will have exhausted its hydrogen fuel, expanded into a red giant, and vaporized the inner planets. The gradual slowing is real. The catastrophe it implies is not remotely near. But this objection also misses something more fundamental. The scenario being described here is not a gradual deceleration spread across cosmological time. It is an instantaneous halt. And Newton's first law does not soften its consequences based on how politely the stopping happens. Inertia does not care about context. It cares only about the change in velocity, and a change from 1,674 kilometers per hour to zero in any time shorter than geological is a catastrophe of the first order. The distance between gradual and sudden is not merely a matter of severity. It is the difference between adaptation and extinction. Here is what the thought experiment ultimately reveals, and this is where Newton's contribution becomes something more than physics. What the laws describe beneath all the mathematics is that the world we experience as stable is not static. It is sustained. There is a profound difference between those two things. A static world requires nothing. A sustained world requires everything, every force, every motion, every invisible negotiation between mass and velocity and gravity, to continue, uninterrupted, exactly as it has been continuing. The spin of the Earth is not incidental to your existence. It is the condition of your existence. The same inertia that would hurl you eastward at supersonic speed if the planet stopped is the inertia that keeps the atmosphere wrapped around you right now. The same gravitational relationship between the Earth and the Moon that slows the rotation imperceptibly is the same relationship that stabilizes the axial tilt and moderates the seasons. The laws that would destroy everything if violated are, in their unviolated state, the laws that make everything possible. Newton saw this, not sentimentally, mathematically. The universe does not protect life out of preference. It protects the conditions that allow life to persist by maintaining the consistency of the laws that govern all matter equally. There is no exception made for living things. There is no special shelter. There is only the law and the extraordinary, improbable fact that the conditions here, on this spinning, tilted, magnetically shielded world, have remained within the narrow range that life requires. You are moving right now at over 1,000 kilometers per hour. You cannot feel it. You never will. And that invisibility, that perfect, when seamless concealment of the forces holding your world together, is perhaps the deepest illusion you live inside every moment of your life. The laws are always working. They do not announce themselves. They do not ask for acknowledgement. They simply continue, indifferent, precise, and absolute. If this kind of thinking changes the way you see the ordinary world, then you already understand what this channel exists to explore. The invisible laws are not hidden. They are simply waiting for the right question.